Okay, good. So, Marie-Pierre? Yeah, also, as a follow-up to one question, we have some workshop plan, a one-day workshop at Today's Art Festival on 25 September, where we'll have some artists and scientists together looking at moon Mars exploration, and they will have a brainstorming hands-on workshop. But also next year, in April, we'll have the same art science program, so with art scientists. So there is a way also we could try to see if in other places in Europe, similar initiative can be started and then shown at EPSC or at EGU at our events. So now, Space Alive, The Art of Levitation by Marie-Pierre Boucher.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Bernard, first for organizing this panel. I'm really happy to be here. So maybe I should say first that myself, I'm not an artist. I'm an art enthusiast, let's say, outer space enthusiast. So I work more in the production of social theory and philosophical concepts emerging out of the relationship or the exchanges between arts and sciences. So while art is providing us with creative approaches for imagining permanent ways of inhabiting the outer space, space modules designed for life in outer space are also providing us with practical ways of inhabiting the Earth in unconventional ways. So today my aim is to engage with how outer space modules and earthly experimental architecture can inform each other towards an intensification of our mental and physical health. So I look at how an enhancement of our physico-mental mobility can augment our capacity to action and also our working productivity, which I think could have positive effects on the life of astronauts, for instance, who live in the International Space Station. So in the context of today's global mobility, information, bodies, and goods are circulating across the globe and even further into outer space. However, their modes of transportation do not necessarily increase their physico-mental mobility. So the issue here is the development of mobile architecture of, let's say, like car, planes, or recreational vehicles is giving rise to a mobile-less society. So a society whose inhabitants travel across the globe to end up in the motionless comfort of their bed, couches, and airplane seats. So contemporary architecture looks primarily at biotechnology as a model to enliven both architecture and the life of its inhabitants. So today, by orchestrating a dialogue between historical and contemporary architecture, I want to engage with the manner in which the International Space Station, as a form of mobile architecture that forces its inhabitants to constantly renegotiate their psychophysical mobility, provides us with a better model than biotechnology. So maybe it's to consider the architecture of the International Space Station itself as a form of biotechnology. So in 1925, Austrian artist-architect Friedrich Kistler formulated a series of demands to reinvent architecture. He requested a liberation from the ground, the abolition of the static axis and of walls and foundations to emphasize a system of spans in free space. So his design approach emphasized the necessity to liberate architectural constructions from the determining constraints of the ground, and it also problematized the architectural elements that compose space, like floor, ceiling, and walls, in terms of a continuity, where the elements that compose space are giving the same element as the same value of the space between them. So we could say, so this is a model here, the Endless House, that he presented in 1936. In New York, it's a prototype, it was never built, but we could imagine that his design strategy anticipated the architecture of the International Space Station in that it promoted techniques of gravitation based on movements across surfaces rather than movement along axes from point to point. So Kistler vigorously denounced the production of new architectural forms wrapped around conventional modes of living. For Kistler, the fundamental denominator to account for the validity of any architectural environment is not the newness of its forms, but its capacity to intensify health. In Kistler's own terms, to intensify health is to develop techniques that are capable of triggering the creative expressions of humans' potentials towards an intensification of their capacity to action. So Kistler defined health as a kind of an embodied reality that an experiential embodied reality that results from a complex entanglement between physical, mental, natural, and technological forces. So we find like resonance with that, for instance, in Out of This World, a new field of space architecture. Space architect Brent Sherwood explains that space architecture is an emerging field whose aim is to develop inhabitable modules that maintain and enhance physiological and psychological well-being in order to maximize the productivity of its inhabitants. So we could say that Kistler invites us to ask how the International Space Station can be used as a model to construct earthly architectural structures that can trigger new confluences between mentality and physicality. So of course, Kistler's architecture is more alluring for outer space, but we found contemporary projects that took seriously his demands and that seek to integrate the perceptual challenges brought about by life in weightlessness into the construction process of earthly architectural structures. Well, before to show some of these projects, I want to engage with a neuroscience project, Bodies in the Space Environment, that is led both at York University, the Center for Vision Research at York University in Canada, and also the Aero-Astro Lab program at the MIT. So they explored the contribution of gravity to sensory and motor functions, particularly balance and spatial orientation. They produced a series of experiments, both in microgravity aircrafts and also in underwater in buoyancy conditions, to investigate how the perceptual up, how we can, they use the O-card system when the letter P turns into the letter D to see how astronauts can orient themselves in space according to the up. So their outcomes suggest that in conditions of reduced gravity, we rely more on body orientation cues rather than visual cues. So this is kind of a critique of the dominant approach for long-term mission in outer space that would create, one of the aims would be to create artificial gravity chambers. So the director of the project here, Professor Lawrence Harris, director of Center for Vision Research, is saying that instead of producing artificial gravity, we should work towards developing the architecture of the International Space Station to enhance proprioceptive experiences. So the problem for him is not necessarily to create these artificial environments, the problem is actually architectural. So he's explaining in the station, walls, ceiling, and floors frequently exchange subjective identities, giving rise to an experience of continuous or endless space. Same way as Gilles Clément recalls the story of a bunch of astronauts who had lost one of their crew members in the International Space Station, but the guy was just below them. They could just not see him. So I'm going to show some projects now that bring this into concrete manifestation. So this is a project by Thomas Saraceno, an artist based in Germany. It's called In Orbit. The piece is a giant spider web. It's installed 20 meters above the ground. It covers 2,500 meters square and spreads itself out across the 3 levels below a massive glass cupola. Well, maybe here we can see really the 3 levels, but there is really 3 levels of nets that are held apart one another by a series of air-filled PVC balls that measure 8.5 meters in diameter. So I think the piece acts to a certain extent as a visual metaphor of the relation between planets and our capacity to develop a truly cosmological conception of space. So to experience the piece, you have to first go up the 4th floor of the gallery. Then they provide you with a one-piece suit and some shoes to make sure you will not get stuck in the installation or something. Then you have to go up some metal staircase, so it really gives you the feeling that you're about to enter the Soyuz craft. And then you slide down onto the net. I have to say myself, when I experienced the piece, I was not sure I could trust the artist, really, because when you arrive at the edge and you see like it's 20 meters and people there, I was like more like a baby crawling and attaching myself. After a while, you kind of feel it's okay, but at the beginning, I have to say, it gives you a kind of feeling of disorientation that you're not quite sure you can continue. So I think this piece, it asks you what level of mental energy you need to carry your body through to the next level of physical activity. So I think this is, Saraceno to a certain extent is looking at the impossibility of levitating on Earth to think about what it would mean to have an experience of weightless movement and what it could bring to us. And I think this idea of the level of mental energy that we need to bring our physical conditions to another level is actually where the threshold between art and science can meet. This is where art and science can work both respectively in their own field, but also this level of, I think for an astronaut in the International Space Station, the level of mental energy that you need to carry through the mission is really important to the productivity of your work in the station. So Saraceno explains that users must coordinate their movements in order to move optimally throughout the net configuration. What is interesting too is that it shows that it also renders visible the way that we move in terms of proprioception, because you don't necessarily see the other dwellers on the installation, but you constantly feel their movement. Another thing that is really interesting is that at some point, if you lay down on the installation, you kind of feel that you're floating on a sailing boat. I don't know if you've ever sailed, but it's basically the same feeling. So it's quite interesting, the movement it gives. So In Orbit works with how the unprecedented forms of perception experienced in reduced gravity conditions can inform earthly architectural design to give rise to unconventional modes of living. So it looks, at how the International Space Station as an environment where our weight is reduced can inform earthly architecture in order to free us from the burden of our own weight and to intensify our being, both mental and physical. So I'm going to show another project here. These are more images. This is a project by American architect Greg Lynn, who is more working in relationship with navigation technologies, submarines, rather than outer space, but it's still extreme environments. He's also concerned with the idea that we end up that today's architecture is basically you sit down in your couch and it's like you have internet on demand, you can do everything, so you never move. So basically your house has become kind of a hospital bed. So he's interested in how can space make us move. So this is a prototype of a house that moves at 270-degree angles, so where inhabitants are invited to crawl on the wall. So it's the same idea maybe at the International Space Station, where you don't think of the space in terms of the difference between spatial elements like floors, ceilings, and walls. Instead, you experience space as a surface. So, of course, lots of people will say that it would be exhausting to live in a house that would move like that. Of course, it wouldn't move at that speed, but it's kind of a metaphor to thinking how the ISS is actually already informing the way we live on Earth. And I think maybe, I don't know if you've been in Lisbon, but Lisbon is also a good example of these kind of things with the hills. You always go up and down, so it's this idea of the oblique function that you experience as a surface. And of course, you always need to ask yourself the next mental or physical mental energy that you need to go up the hill. I don't know if it happened to you, but it happened to me several times in Lisbon, and I was like, how did I end up again below this hill, you know? Like, I don't know how to move in this city. So, I think what we get out of that is thinking the way that architecture is actually a choreographic act, and that it invites people to dance in space, to live space through dancing it. And it's interesting because there's a Portuguese philosopher called José Gil who explains that dancers learn to transform gravity into energy to connect themselves with their own potentialities. So I think this is a line of that can be pursued, this idea of architecture. I think it's quite a new field, I think, outer space architecture, but I think it could inform art, and if we manage to find new structures on art that are informed by outer space, maybe then the dialogue can be pursued and brought back into outer space modules. Thank you.